Can you all hear me well? Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you again, Michael, and thank you everyone for making this happen, for having us here all gathered in this space to discuss all these very important issues. I want to give a special thanks to the McCain Academy, to Dennis, to Annette, to Michael, to Christina, and also to Dina and to Nick for hosting us so generously here in this space. And I'm very excited to share with you today this message. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about ayahuasca biopiracy, advancements and future prospects in ethnopharmacological research. And there's nothing more splendid in the human condition than our ability to break through the paradigms that sustain the reality that we hold to be the ultimate truth. Ethnocentrically, we are taught that the world as we know it is constituted by rather absolute principles that our lineage, of course, has mastered and every time comprehends more and more. We're well trained to defend at all costs the reality that we know and to feel attacked and fight back anyone questioning its foundations. That is why it is deeply humbling when such untouchable reality is cleverly tricked and disrupted by the invisible agencies emerging from the relations of our altered states of consciousness. When the sick are finally cured and where your sorrow is at last gone, your heart confirms that your ordinary world is only one among multiple realities that constitute the human experience. Yet these epiphanies will have not made justice until the indigenous intellectual authors, the original knowledge holders of these social networks, are ethically and equitably included in the co-creation of our future. Attempting to do my due duty, I am bringing to your attention my experiences working with the Cofán indigenous people of southwestern Colombia. I will share with you first some background on my master's research about the diversity of the Cofán Yahelianas and the Cofán history. Second, my process recognizes that my work inadvertently threatened the Cofán sovereignty by exposing their knowledge to the risk of biopiracy. And third, my preliminary exploration of potential avenues to support the Cofán self-determining efforts through the ontological and epistemological reflexivity of our research practices and institutions thinking. Before we delve into my Cofán journey, let's review some aspects of the Yahe concept. As you all know in this audience, Yahe is a synonym of ayahuasca, constituting a research topic that has been vastly explored by, among others, anthropologists, ethnobotanists, taxonomists, phytochemists, and more recently, physicians and psychiatrists. Yahe is a scholar inquiry that has lasted for about 170 years, and it promises to continue to grow. During all this time, many Melpigeishi lianas have been mentioned in the literature as Yahe species, and the fact that indigenous people could recognize many types of Yahe lianas on the spot, despite the lack of evident morphological differences, troubled the 20th century explorer Dr. Richard Evans Schultes, who generously addressed this enigma in his work. Yet it was not until 1986 that Brown and Gates, a student of the late World Melpigeishi Authority, Dr. William Anderson from the University of Michigan, resolved many taxonomic problems associated with the reported Yahelianas up to that point and narrowed it down to 4 species, members of 3 genera. So the species Banisauropsis caapi, obviously very well known, Banisauropsis muricata, and also Caleum antifebrile and Tetrapteris styloptera. But from these 4 species, only the use of Banisauropsis caapi has been regarded ubiquitous throughout the Amazon basin. In fact, the use of the other 3 lianas has only been confirmed in 1 locality each. And because of that disparity of use, Banisauropsis caapi is referred in the literature as the Yaheliana, and the other species as Yahe analogs. In 1990, Schultes reported another Yahe analog among the Carapana indigenous people in the Vaupés region of Colombia, the species Tetrapteris mucronata. And 3 decades elapsed until last year, a group of Brazilian scholars showed 2 new Yahe analogs, the species Banisteropsis levifolia and Diplopteris pubipetada. It is worth highlighting that this was the first time that a species in the genus Diplopteris has been reported as a Yahe analog. And consequently, this data further indicates that Schultes' ayahuasca enigma is far from over. And making this subject far more complex, the Yahe drink is not only made with either Banisteropsis caapi or the Yahe analogs, but it is usually also made with at least 1 additional ingredient out of 3 species, the so-called Yahe admixtures. 2 of these plants are Meltigeaceae species, Diplopteris cabrerana and Diplopteris longialata. The other species is Psychoactive viridis, a member of the coffee family. Most, if not all, the plants thus far mentioned have a common biochemistry, as they all produce substantial amounts of indole alkaloids, particularly of 2 types, beta-carbonyls, which are monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and N,N-dimethyltryptamines, considered responsible of producing visions or hallucinations when they reach the central nervous system. Yet the complexity of the drink does not end here. As Mark reminded us yesterday, there are over 100 different plants that are used as Yahe mixtures, depending on the community and the shaman. And as if that was not enough, there are also plants that are not Yahe mixtures, and that they are also employed in relation to the Yahe ritual. So this reminds us that despite the excitement sparked by our research, we are just scratching the surface regarding our understanding of this diverse practice, right at the time when the indigenous people who have inherited this knowledge are severely marginalized and a threat by many external identifiable top-down pressures. The Cofans are an indigenous nation of less than 6,000 people, located in southwestern Colombia and northeastern Ecuador. The Cofans have also been highly regarded by explorers such as Richard Evan Schultes and his disciples Wade Davis, Mark Plotkin, and Homer Pinkley for their sophisticated knowledge about the environment and medicinal plants, including complex preparations such as curare, which is a hunting poison, and Yahe. Throughout their colonial history, they were and continue to be victims of more than 5 centuries of European and mestizo invasions, exploitation, and abuse, including the Spanish colonization, religious indoctrination, enslavement, and exploitation through mining, harvesting of the Kenna tree bark for treating malaria, the rubber boom for the Second World War industry, and more recently, oil extraction, more mining, and cattle ranching. Moreover, in Colombia, the Cofans have also suffered from narco-trafficking and the associated conflict of the past 3 decades, the underrated and underproblematized violent side effects of the cocaine consumption frenzy demanded by the so-called First World. Fortunately, after the signing of the Colombian Peace Accord in 2016, the armed conflict has been drastically reduced, but it is by no means over. Colombia is not only the #1 country in orchids and birds, but sadly, it is also the #1 country in environmental and social leaders murdered in complicity with the international private interests that insist in taking what they can use to make profit, leaving behind famine and death. Just to have an idea, during the last 5 years, more than 1,000 brave environmental and social leaders have been silenced forever. This year alone, every 2 to 3 days, 1 leader has been murdered at cold blood. Needless to say that there have been no guarantees to protect those standing against the obstructors of the regenerative life force of our planet. The Cofans, self-identified as forest people and guardians of nature, a claim supported by the study that published this map, in which it was found out that the Cofans maintain 80% of the forest land cover as opposed to a mere 20% maintained by adjacent mestizo communities. Currently, the Colombian Cofans only have 4% of their ancestral territory, legally entitled to them. You can see in the map the ancestral territory by these dark dashed lines. And it includes cities as known as Orito, La Hormiga, Puerto Asís. But from this, only 4% is legally entitled to them, and the remaining 96% has been taken away from them by the forces of colonialism, development, and more recently, fair trade in a 40 to 60 year span of oil and agricultural exploitation. As you can imagine, these economic waves have resulted in the disruption and degradation of the fragile forest ecology and the ecological knowledge upon which the Kofan have relied for their existence. Furthermore, the Kofan speak Ainge, a language isolate with purportedly 40% of its vocabulary dealing with forest ecology. So we could well be losing in the upcoming years and decades a unique understanding of the rainforest and its medicines. In fact, in Colombia, it is estimated that only 20% of the Kofans speak Ainge fluently, the vast majority of whom are elders over 60 years old. My story with the Jahe drink started by witnessing the transformation of my relationship with my brother, from rivals and almost enemies to beloved brothers and friends. I participated with my family in Jahe ceremonies presided over by Taita Querubinqueta Alvarado, the maximum authority of the Kofan people, who will be turning 109 at the beginning of July. As a result of these experiences, the Jahe drink transformed my family and guided me in the emergence of a research relationship with the Kofans. In 2018, I visited the community of Taita Querubin, and I had 3 meetings with the local authorities, and as it is their norm, each meeting was followed by a Jahe ceremony. As a result of this visit, they asked me to pursue a project that helped them restore the crops and populations of Jahe that had been dismantled as collateral damage of the glyphosate spraying promoted by the Plan Colombia and the World on Drugs policies. In this preliminary visit, the Kofan shared with me that they grew at least 8 different types of Jahe, presumably Banisopsis capi. So I checked in the literature whether that purported diversity of Banisopsis capi had ever been systematically evaluated to correspond to an entity or a rank above form or cultivar. In other words, I wanted to know whether the Kofan Jahe types were or meet the category of subspecies. In 1982, Brown and Gates published the latest revision of the genus Banisopsis, where she considered the cultural types of Banisopsis capi to be chemical variants, vegetatively propagated by stem cuttings. But without offering more data about this observation, many questions remain. So I asked myself, is this chemical variance understanding robust among the dozens of reported Banisopsis capi types in the literature? If the chemical variants hold true for the cultivar types, do they also hold true for the wild types? So off I went to document and analyze ethnobotanical, taxonomic, and ecological data of the wild Kofan Jaheliana types. And while in Rome, I also sought to understand whether the cultural importance of other plants used in relation to the Jahe ritual depended on the geographical location across the Kofan's territory. I won't say much about these plants in this talk, but I do want to share that these plants include species that have been used in the blow hunting, particularly to prepare the capacity of the lungs to blow air. And interestingly, several of these species are also known for inducing altered states of consciousness. Now, please, let us see the video link to the presentation.
Apa manye baye ikori rama. Ima ke komune dega. Hai. Baye ei komune, yemo ei komune hitdo.
Mi nombre es Taita Querubinqueta Alvarado, de los indígenas cofanes. Nuestros abuelos nos dejaron en esta selva para nosotros vivir con nuestras botánicas naturales y la medicina tradicional. A la gente blanco aprendieron su su medicamento de su libro de enciclopedia, para operaciones de una manera, para conocimiento. Nosotros estudiamos por nuestro viaje. Viaje es una vida de nosotros.
Una ei komuna nye ija komuna hirora. Una nye duiko eroyena.
De 8 años para adelante iba tomando mi viaje con mis padres finados y con mi maestro Teita Patricio. Otro es mi maestro Rubén del Aguarico para allá. De estos ríos yo me fui a conocerle y a tomar mi medicina. Un guía espiritual es para camino de bien de todo. Mi poder, mi ciencia y espiritualidad, mi apoderado para consentir entre los compañeros, entre los amigos, para tener más en conocimiento, para practicar las ciencias espirituales.
Esta historia relata mi experiencia de investigación como etnobotánico, explorando la diversidad del yagé entre los cofanes del sudoccidente de Colombia. En junio del 2019 me embarqué en una increíble serie de expediciones con los taitas del resguardo Cofán Ucumari-Canque junto con varios miembros de la comunidad. Llevamos a cabo 7 expediciones para buscar las variedades silvestres del yagé del pueblo Cofán que utilizaban con mayor frecuencia los taitas que vivieron en este territorio antes de que la explotación del petróleo, la ganadería, el narcotráfico y el conflicto armado se apoderaran de la región. Este proyecto nace como iniciativa del pueblo Cofán para colectar semillas de las variedades silvestres de yagé y restaurar las poblaciones y cultivos destruidos como daños colaterales de la fallida aspersión con glifosato de los proyectos políticos del Plan Colombia y la guerra contra las drogas del gobierno de Colombia y de Estados Unidos. Emprendimos nuestro viaje a lo profundo de la selva, siguiendo el paso rápido del taita querubín Queta Alvarado, la máxima autoridad espiritual del pueblo Cofán y quien tiene 107 años. Asimismo, 3 de las expediciones fueron lideradas por su compadre y seguidor Reinerio Queta Criollo, uno de los mayores de la comunidad que también sana con yagé. Al ser seguidor, se le considera discípulo de su compadre taita querubín, mas no taita. Sin embargo, el abuelito Rey es uno de los principales herederos del conocimiento cofán y es un hábil cazador, diestro en el manejo de la cerbatana. Compartir con esta cultura y con el entorno natural que los ha acogido por miles de años es sin duda alguna una experiencia transformadora que nos hace reflexionar sobre lo que significa ser humanos. El yagé y otras prácticas culturales asociadas al territorio son el elixir de la vida de los mayores.
Ay, abuelito, pero igual usted sigue fuertecísimo, vea cómo sube.
El abuelo camina más que uno.
Nosotros antes llevábamos nomás en la espalda remesita. Espalda, yo de canasto también llevamos. Así nosotros los
La
dos
abuela
vamos.
también, vea, ella, mire,
Sí,
ella
la abuelita también tiene su carga.
Yo llevo semillas de yuca, otras cosas, llenito, despacio. Esa Angélica era pequeña. Esa Angélica lo que está allá.
Eso contaba la Angélica, que ella es de pequeña.
Así conmigo anda.
Mientras avanzaban los días, buscábamos las lianas de yagé silvestre y además de colectar sus semillas, tuve la oportunidad de documentar dichas lianas silvestres y contrastarlas con el yagé cultivado. Esta es una rama de yagé cultivado, la especie Banisteriopsis caapi. Aunque la Academia Occidental ha estudiado esta liana trepadora por casi 170 años, sus docenas de variedades reportadas se han considerado principalmente cultivares, y esta idea también ha prevalecido para las variedades de yagé de los cofanes. Ahora, esta es una liana de yagé silvestre, que si bien se parece al yagé cultivado, me propuse evaluar si en efecto se trata de un cultivar de la especie Banisteriopsis caapi, o si de pronto se puede definir como una subespecie, más allá que un cultivar. Para este tipo de análisis, los botánicos como yo necesitamos documentar datos que definen parentesco entre las plantas, características que se hayan conservado durante la evolución, como las hojas, flores y frutos. Entonces, una vez que los mayores ubicaban las lianas de yagé silvestre, yo instalaba estaciones de ascenso a dosel en la base de los árboles sobre los que las lianas se apoyaban para crecer, porque para documentar sus hojas, flores y frutos tenía que alcanzarlos en el dosel y la capa emergente del bosque, pues es allí donde las lianas maduras producen dichos órganos, entre 20 y 40 metros de altura. Al llegar a un árbol hospedero, lo primero que hacía era extender el plástico sobre el cual organizaba mi equipo de trepa de árboles. Luego identificaba el mejor punto en la selva tupida para disparar con la cauchera una pesa de pesca amarrada a un hilo de pesca de nylon. Preparaba la cauchera, apuntaba y a veces tenía éxito con el primer disparo. Luego cambiaba el nylon de pesca por uno más grueso. Y a su vez, este lo cambiaba por la línea de vida. Montaba mi estación en la base del árbol y a subir se dijo. Siempre guiado por el bejuco. Y en busca de las hojas, flores, frutos y tallos maduros. Y oh sorpresa la que me llevé al escudriñar estos órganos. Los cofanes usan y han usado por varias generaciones más de una especie de yagé. Contrario a lo que se creía, el yagé silvestre de los cofanes no son cultivares, sino especies diferentes de la Banisteriopsis caapi. Este es un hallazgo con profundas implicaciones para el pueblo cofán, el turismo del yagé y la medicina tradicional, y pone a prueba la capacidad que tenemos como sociedad global de descolonizar, aprender de y colaborar con las naciones indígenas, en este caso la nación cofán. This work highlights the ingenuity of the Cofan people, intellectual authors of a unique system of knowledge. Given that the world economic development threatens the survival of this heritage, we call for the global society and the national and international governments to join efforts to protect and support the Cofan cultural revitalization. Y de vuelta al uso cultural del yagé, una vez se cosechan los tallos de las lianas, se prepara la medicina.
Ucumaricanque, pueblo del oso, tierra del jaguar, selva de los cofanes, nace espiritualidad, donde nace el agua que bebemos, el aire que respiramos, donde nace el poder que Dios nos da, con sus curvas y coronas, collares de semillas y dientes de animales, qué lindo que se los ve, tomando sagrado yagé. Antiguos cofanes, antiguos guerreros, antiguos yageceros, temen la fuerza para poderles cantar. Temen la fuerza para poderles cantar. canta con alegría, donde se toma yajecito para armonizar la vida. En el pueblo de los cofanes se canta con alegría, donde se toma yajecito para armonizar la vida. Gracias mi Dios, gracias Madre Tierra por darnos esa selva donde queremos vivir en paz. Ucumaricanque, donde ruge el tigre, donde canta la anaconda, donde está el gran guardián. Vamos mis cofanes, vamos cantando, vamos danzando, vamos luchando por nuestra tierra, tierra de salida. Vamos mis cofanes, vamos cantando.
Thank you. I am pleased to share with you that this is the very first time that we share publicly this video, because the Kofan have learned the hard way to be reserved and protective of their knowledge. And they have taught me how enthusiastic scholars like me can end up inadvertently harming them if we do not listen and reflect about how our work in alliance has to work with them in alliance as research partners. I sympathize with their stance and decided to review the literature to understand the risks of publishing our study results, particularly in relation to patents. There is no certainty about which was the first patent in history, but the earliest record is found out to be around 1416 for the patent of Sir Franciscus Petri, who was conferred exclusionary rights by the Grand Council of Venice for a device that turned wood into felt. While there's no evidence that Petri was the inventor of that device, he received the patent because of the advantages of using it in Venice at that time. A decade later, Filippo Brunelleschi was also given special privileges for the design of a vessel, Il Badalone, which was intended to transport marble for the construction of the Dome of Florence. Unfortunately, the ship sank on its maiden voyage, but it did not prevent the perpetuation of a system that, although intending to incentivize innovation, it bluntly privileges some demographics over others. Later on, a printing pattern was conferred, and a decade after, the Venetian Patent Statute was implemented. And with the journeys of Columbus, a similar contract emerged. Through the Columbus Privileges and Prerogatives Letter, which granted him discovery and conquest rights by the Queen Elizabeth of Castile and the King Ferdinand of Aragon. Subsequently, in the Bulls of Donations, Pope Alexander VI granted the King and the Queen rights to all the islands and mainlands discovered and to be discovered, 100 leagues to the west and south of the Azores towards India. And in these episodes, we can recognize something crucial for my ontological argument in this talk. So both institutions, the government and the church, share the understanding of a world that separates humans from other life forms and things, as if they awaited for our possession, our control, and shall we say, our profit? And this pattern has continued to spread for decades and centuries, leading to the development of treaties, protocols, and institutions that make sure that one narrow reality dominates the planet's economies and obstructs the regenerative life force of the planet and its species. Of special importance in this effort was the Paris Convention for the Protection of Industrial Property of 1883, which was a pivotal effort that led to ratify that purported universal understanding of intellectual property, which led then to the creation of the World Intellectual Property Organization and the Patent Cooperation Treaty, which privileged general knowledge that derives from powerful economic groups over collective traditional knowledge, which is rooted in marginalized communities. Thus, these are key events that prevent the co-funds from directly benefit from their knowledge shared in our project. So dangerous to my case, in particular, is also the International Union for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants, which grants breeders temporary monopolies to profit from their genetically engineered plant varieties, which again privileges economic powers and private interests over farms, producers, and the public. And while the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, and the Nagoya Protocol intend to foster planetary sustainability, conservation, and ethical use of genetic resources with fair and equitable benefit sharing with partner communities, the enforcement of these international treaties is still precarious. So despite of them, if a patent derives from the results of our study, the patent holders would not be held legally accountable to share benefits with the co-funds. In fact, there are multiple granted and pending JAHE-related patents that have derived from research in our fields. Patents that are or will produce profit without permission or commitment of a fair and ethical compensation to the indigenous communities where the relationship with JAHE began. Only a year ago, a group of law scholars from the Colombian nonprofit Tierra Digna published this research that ignited a lot of concern because back then, a year ago only, there were 8 approved patents related to JAHE. Yet in my most recent search, carried out in the past few days, I realized that this has skyrocketed. So looking at the patent scope database and the US PTO database, I found already over 400 entries when searching the word ayahuasca. This suggests that the market of ayahuasca-related commodities is rapidly growing in our centralized markets dominated by the global north. Let's take a look at some examples. So the never-ending Vanistropsis capi CV Divine patent by Lauren Miller is, surprise, surprise, still current. After having been revoked once and regranted back in 2001. Other current parents include a product that functions as a probe of serotonin, may be used in mood regulation therapies, a vaporizer, a phytochemical extraction method, and a product to treat plant viruses, fungi, and insects. Yet there are many other pending patents, such as vehicles for cannabis, oil, and other ayahuasca-like substances, products for uses in assisted psychotherapy and the treatment of depression, particular alkaloid compositions, and most disappointing of them all, at least in my personal view, a synthetic ayahuasca. Unsurprisingly, most of these patents are owned by people in the global north, which inevitably further expands the economic chasm with the global south. Once again, despite the fact that the original intellectual authors of this knowledge are Amazonian indigenous peoples. So, next time your paradigm shifts under an altered state of consciousness, think about the benefit that you have gained from the indigenous knowledge and put yourself in the shoes of those who have survived a war caused by the greed of the international economic groups that profit from obstructing the life force of our planet and the prohibitionist global policies, which by extension deny indigenous elders the right to make a living leading ayahuasca ceremonies worldwide because of a lack of will to legality, recognizing that ayahuasca has outstanding medicinal properties awaiting to heal our multiple peoples. And I will close this talk by suggesting 4 processes that may be pertinent to shift the constraining paradigm leading us into the abyss. First, question our role and stance, particularly as researchers. Self-reflect about the entitlement of our actions. such as the entitlement to study anything, anywhere. Realize that we carry with us our privileges and that encountering others necessarily implies engaging in asymmetrical power relations, which can harm, even if inadvertently. Second, if you want to help, listen to the ones you want to help, once and again, until you learn to be guided by their wisdom. And treat them as your partners, not as your informants. Invite them to these types of gatherings and foster horizontal conversations. Third, strive to gain and spread a multicultural and multilingual education. To be purged from Western exceptionalism, yet avoiding essentialism. Fourth, make the changes you want to see at all scales, as long as you put first the life force of all earthlings. And finally, recognize that regenerative life force out there and within as the main agency that can guide us into a new era of higher ethical and moral standards as the law has never known. Thank you very much.